If you are founder of a scaling company and you have this feeling that even though your people are genuinely capable, too much energy still leaks into searching for information, chasing down decisions, or reestablishing the same things over and over again, then this episode is for you. My name is Agnieszka Jurczyk. I work with founders of companies that are growing fast enough that the intuitive way of operating, which worked so brilliantly at the beginning of their startup journey, is no longer enough. In moments when the chaos doesn't come from lack of competence, but from lack of simple shared frameworks that let people operate effectively and independently. In today's episode of Founder to Zero, we'll talk about scaling operations, how to build processes that help rather than hinder, and how to give the team clarity without corporate rigidity. Let's go, shall we? Conrad is running, his suitcase bouncing, its strap hitting his knee. Boarding has just started, and he has only just made it through check-in. His phone rings just as Conrad is trying to put his passport into his pocket. He misses, of course. It's the CFO. Hey, listen, the investor wants behavioral data from the platform. What behavioral data? Conrad slows down only to avoid plunging into a family with a pushchair. Usage, engagement, cohorts. Talk to the CTO. Already did. He said he'd pull it as soon as I tell him what exactly they need. So what's the problem? That's exactly the problem. I have no idea what exactly they need. This isn't something I have in the books. Are you coming through or not? The security officer has clearly run out of patience. Conrad catches the stares of the people he's clearly blocking. I have to go, he says. I'll call you back. And hangs up. He won't call back. The queue ahead of him is at least an hour long, and he has no more than half. His phone keeps vibrating, almost continuously. On Slack, the CTO is asking about roadmap priorities again. Conrad rolls his eyes and types, "Call you in a sec." He won't call. The QS seems not to move a single centimeter, so Conrad, shifting from foot to foot, checks his emails. He's in CC on most of them. No one actually needs anything from him, but all those messages have to be read because the ones where someone does need something look exactly the same as those where they don't. He decides that when he's back, he'll do something about this. He won't. On WhatsApp, the head of sales also doesn't know what priorities they agreed on. But they did agree. Yesterday. Well, maybe the day before. Conrad takes off his belt, drops his watch, headphones, and tablet into the plastic tray. Not his phone, though, because someone is calling again. This time it's HR. Conrad, we have a problem. What problem? We've hired 6 new people. And the problem is? Right, we agreed you'd have your 15 minutes in the onboarding. Yes, I remember. So what time? Because they're starting today. It's Conrad's turn to go through the scanner. He says quickly, I have to go, I'll call you back. He won't call back. The phone lands in the tray as the tray is already halfway into the scanner. Conrad empties the tray straight into his suitcase, and over the speakers he hears an announcement that boarding on his flight is about to close. The phone vibrates again. An email this time. Urgent. Contract. They could at least say which one, thinks Conrad, trying to read the message out of the corner of his eye while sprinting towards passport control. Someone is asking whether the clauses are okay, but Conrad has already approved this. He just can't remember when or where or who exactly he told they were fine. The phone rings again. A client this time. An old client, one of their first, from the times when there were 5 of them and everything was obvious. Hey, Conrad. You know I like dealing with you directly, so I thought I'd call. Go ahead, sure. What's going on? We raised the bug with you guys, but no one has come back to us. Right, let me take a look. From the next QA, Conrad messages the COO, who forwards it to the team. Someone adds another person. Someone asks, is this on our side or tech's? Tech replies, we passed this to Ops ages ago. Ops replies, that's news to me. 6 people in the thread. Nobody knows anything. Conrad reaches into his pocket for his passport, but it's not there. The border officer looks at him impatiently. Conrad frantically checks pocket after pocket. Right, in the suitcase. The phone vibrates again. Someone on Slack. Who's supposed to decide what we do with this? Ops says it's not theirs. Tech says it's not theirs. Finance says it's not theirs. So I'm looping in Conrad. And from somewhere above Conrad's head, a voice crackles through the speakers. Final boarding call. Conrad practically grabs the passport from the officer's hand and starts running. Suitcase in one hand, phone in the other, passport and boarding pass in his pocket, probably. Heart beating too fast, and not just because he can't remember the last time he actually ran. Conrad isn't thinking about the investor he's flying to meet, not about the round that everything depends on, not about the negotiations he's still hoping to make it to. He's thinking about one thing. How is it possible that they have so many brilliant people and yet every little thing still ends up with him? At the airport, on the run, phone permanently in hand. Breathless, Conrad finally reaches the gate and looks at the staff with pleading eyes. I made it, right? But it could be different. Picture the same airport, same flight, same investor waiting for negotiations on the next round. But this time, Conrad isn't running. He's walking at a normal human pace. The suitcase rolls quietly beside him. The phone, also quiet, sits in his pocket, not in his hand. Not because nothing is happening in the company, quite the opposite actually. The company has grown. The team has expanded again. There are more topics than ever. But something has changed. The CFO knows exactly what data is needed and where to get it. The CTO doesn't ask about priorities on the run because the roadmap has a clearly named direction and principles for prioritization. Changes happen, yes, but Conrad no longer has to approve each one individually. Sales doesn't ask either. Sales knows. HR onboards people without improvising because the founder's intro is a pre-recorded part of the process, not a favor, depending on his availability. The client gets a response before they even think of calling Conrad because at any moment they can check for themselves who is handling their case and what stage it's at. Conrad sits down at the gate with a coffee in his hand. Boarding in 10 minutes. He takes out his phone and calmly scans the dashboards. Shareholder reports updated this morning. Behavioral data looks good. Financials also in order. All client tickets on time. One urgent due today, but someone has just changed the status to pending client verification, so it's all good. And the head of sales has just left a heart under the message about the CTO updating the roadmap. Conrad smiles to himself. Not because he's stopped being needed, only because he finally doesn't have to be everywhere at once for the company to run properly. And that's exactly what today's episode is about. How to make that happen. How to stop being needed everywhere at once, but still have everything under control. Before we go further, a quick ask. If what I'm talking about here resonates with where you are right now and you'd like to hear more, hit subscribe. A thumbs up on this video would also mean a lot. In return, I'll keep making more content about how to scale a business without losing your mind along the way. Thank you for every bit of support. If just like Conrad, you have the feeling that you're answering the same questions over and over again, doing the same things for the nth time, and revisiting decisions you've already made, especially operational, not strategic ones, that probably means your organization has grown to the point where you need some processes. And if the very word process triggers some internal resistance in you, you're not alone. Most founders feel it. Most founders, at the mere thought of processes, feel the urge to run for the hills. And I completely understand that. Genuinely. Because that resistance isn't groundless. So let's look at the most common beliefs it comes from. The first one is the fear that processes will kill the speed and flexibility. That instead of acting fast, you'll start following procedures. That every decision will require approvals, sign-offs, or predetermined stages that in any given case might not even be needed. And that a startup that always won through agility will suddenly become slow and start tripping over its own feet. That doesn't have to be true. A process doesn't have to slow things down, make them rigid, or reduce flexibility. The second belief is the association of processes with corporate bureaucracy, with dozens of pages of procedures, with forms, with fields for every conceivable detail. That whole machine where no one knows why they're doing what they're doing, but everyone knows that's how things should be done. And the natural fear is, I didn't build a startup to turn it into a rigid corporation. That doesn't have to be true either. A business process doesn't have to be a corporate machine. The third myth is more subtle but very powerful. It's the belief that processes are for the weak. That if you have smart people, all you need is to give them freedom and everything will sort itself out. Processes, that's a sign that you don't trust your team, or that you're trying to control people instead of giving them real ownership. That also doesn't have to be true. A process can be built in such a way that it doesn't constrain ownership, but supports it. And finally, myth 4, that processes are heavy and long-term. That once you wrap something in a process, you're stuck with it for years. That creating a process is a big project itself. One that needs time. And since there's no time right now, better not start at all. And that also doesn't have to be true. A process doesn't have to be something that takes 6 months to implement or that will stay with you for years. Each of these fears makes sense because each of them is rooted in processes implemented badly. Because it's not processes that turn a company into a slow, ponderous corporation. That only happens with processes that are badly calibrated to the reality of a given company, to its current scale, to its stage of development and the level of complexity. Because what a scaling startup actually needs is not extensive procedures where every unlikely edge case is described in exhaustive detail. A startup needs a simple framework that removes from people's heads, both team members and yours, questions like, who makes decisions? What do we prioritize? Where do we check what stage a thing is at? And when you don't need to ask, because you can just act. You know the MVP concept, right? The minimum viable product. That simple, not yet perfect product you release to the market to get it into customers' hands as early as possible and refine it based on their actual needs. Exactly. You can apply that exact same approach to processes. So let's take a look at what a minimum viable process looks like in a scaling startup. A process in MVP form is not a document running to dozens of pages. It's not a color-coded flowchart with stages, arrows, definitions, exceptions, footnotes, and cross-references whose complexity could rival international tax law. It's not something heavy and rigid that nobody reads and everyone follows only when someone is watching over their shoulder. No, no. A process in MVP form has nothing to do with any of that. A minimum viable process is the smallest sensible structure that simply answers the most common questions. Only the questions that keep coming back. And this is crucial. A minimum viable process doesn't exist to describe reality nicely. It exists so you don't have to describe the same things over and over again. In practice, a minimum viable process rests on 6 very simple pillars. Pillar 1, the definition of the scope. What area of work are we talking about? Where it starts and where it ends. What is within this process and what isn't, because it's handled by a different process. Think of it as the definition of a service that a given team in your company provides either directly to the client or internally to other parts of the business. Pillar 2. The process owner. The person accountable for the process who decides how it works. One role, one name. Not a committee, not we, not the team. When a decision needs to be made, it must be unambiguously clear whose decision it is. Pillar 3. Single point of contact. So that everyone who needs something from a given area in your company knows exactly where to go without having to contact several people first just to figure it out. Without checking each time whether the person they're messaging happens to be at work or is on holiday. One email address, one Slack channel, one link to a form where requests can be submitted. Because when there's a single point of contact, if someone is unavailable, it's not the person requesting support who has to hunt for a replacement. They don't have to think about it at all. They just submit their requests where they always do. Finding cover is the job of the process owner, the one you appointed in Pillar 2. They need to know when someone on their team is out so the task can be reassigned to someone else. Pillar 4. General principles of operation. The key word here is general, because it's not about anticipating every possible scenario. Absolutely not. This is only about identifying what's repeatable and writing it down once. Not in exhaustive detail, in sufficient detail only. You can approach this using the Pareto principle. Describe 20% of repeatable cases that account for 80% of the time that your team spends on them. For starters, that's more than enough. This repeatability often shows up in 3 places. First, at the input. What do we need to be able to take on a topic without having to ask for things that might be obvious to us, but not necessarily to the person submitting the request? Second, in the process itself. How do we operate? But not every single time, just as a general principle. A very simple workflow is absolutely enough. One that defines the standard way of working but leaves the room for exceptions. You don't need more than a handful of standard statuses and a single column in a spreadsheet where they get recorded. A few basic rules about what people handle independently and what they have to escalate and to whom. And third, at the output. What do we deliver and what do we not deliver? What counts as good enough? This is exactly where you save lots of time on unnecessary perfection. And on that boomerang question, is this going to be enough? The important thing is that whatever you agree here isn't more complex than your scale requires. Because the level of detail appropriate when you're handling 50 cases a month is very different from the level of detail you need when you're handling 5,000 cases a month. Pillar 5. A single source of truth. One place where you can always find the current version, the current agreements, the current data. And it doesn't matter where that source of truth lives. It can be a link to a dashboard in a tool that you're already using. It can just as well be a link to an Excel file on a shared drive. That genuinely doesn't matter. What matters is that it's one place which everyone involved can be certain contains the definitive, up-to-date version of the reality. And pillar 6, the feedback loop. This is the element that separates a useful process from a process that only handles the day-to-day life. A good MVP process produces meaningful aggregate data. Data that allows you as founder and CEO to make strategic decisions more effectively. Because when your startup is growing fast, you no longer have time to manually dig through hundreds of messages or to have dozens of conversations with people just to understand what's really going on. A good MVP process means you don't have to go through request by request. You don't have to sense the problem intuitively or be CC'd on hundreds of emails just to stay in the loop. Because individual messages give you only a point-in-time view. Only aggregate data shows you where the system actually needs your attention. Only then do you see the full picture, and only the full picture lets you consciously adjust the direction. That's the moment when a process stops being just an operational tool and becomes a management tool. And that's all there is to it, just 6 pillars. When you write it down, an MVP process comfortably fits on one page. Because it doesn't cover every single edge case. It doesn't try to be future-proof. It doesn't pretend to know everything. Its only goal is to take the repeatable questions and decisions off people's mental plates. And here's the paradox worth keeping in mind. A good MVP process increases autonomy instead of limiting it. Because when people know where the boundaries are and what's expected of them, they don't constantly have to check whether this is actually theirs or whether doing it this way is really okay. A process in a startup isn't meant to be perfect. In fact, it shouldn't be. It's meant to be useful. And since it's an MVP, by definition, it's just a hypothesis you test in real work and improve it when something turns out to be insufficient. An MVP process should be expanded only when it stops being helpful, or when the business has grown to the point where things that used to be exceptions have become repeatable. Okay, let's take a look at a practical example. Let's take customer support in a tech company. A classic example of an area that, without simple frameworks, starts to generate chaos very quickly. So, pillar 1, the scope. First, you need to clearly establish what exactly this area covers and what it doesn't. Customer support is not everything that comes in from customers. It's receiving requests, communicating with the client while the issue is being resolved, and seeing the case through to closure. It's not negotiating addendums. It's not upselling additional services. It's not fixing bugs in the code. It's not issuing credit notes for incorrectly raised invoices. Customer support is only the handling of requests from customers who use the service. This doesn't mean the support person handles everything alone. They'll need to work with other teams, most of the time. But what this does mean is that the subject of the process is the client request. Not a bug to fix, not an invoice to correct, not an addendum to sign. The request. All those other things are simply handled in separate processes of their own, for which the support agent's request is just the input. Just as for the support itself, the input is the request from the end user. Pillar 2, the process owner. One specific person accountable for this area end to end. Most often, this will be the head of customer support. This doesn't mean they need to know the details of every single request. No. It means they are responsible for the service quality, for maintaining the standards, and seeing the big picture, and responding when that picture doesn't look the way it should. And as I mentioned in the episodes on accountability and conflict prevention, to be able to own all this, this person needs real influence over tool selection, workflow design, and hiring decisions, but only within their budget and mandate. Pillar 3, single point of contact. No more messaging whoever might be able to help. No more WhatsApp calls to the CTO or emails to the founder. One place where requests land. Even if you accept them through different channels, they must ultimately arrive in one place, one QA. This might be a simple ticketing system, for example, because for teams with a handful of support agents, several well-known providers offer simple cloud versions completely free of charge. Requests arrive there when a customer fills in the form on your website or emails support@yourcompany.com. When everything is in one place, nothing gets lost, nothing floats around in private inboxes, and no one has to guess whose hands a given issue is currently in. Pillar 4, how it works. Add the input, add the output, and in the process itself. At the input, you make sure that requests don't reach you incomplete, because anyone who's ever worked in tech has probably received a request along the lines of, "the system isn't working," with no information about where exactly or what isn't working even means. For starters, a simple form is enough, asking for contact details, a short description of the symptoms, and a screenshot. Literally a few simple questions that address the 20% of problems that take up 80% of time. Now the input is sorted, so on to the process itself. For example, the request lands in the ticketing system where it gets a unique reference number. And each one goes to a person who becomes its owner, responsible for delivering an effective resolution for that specific client in that specific issue. How tickets are assigned can be whatever works. Random, alphabetical, agents picking their own from the queue, or via a dispatcher, which is a common solution for larger teams. The most important thing is that simply there is an owner. And it's worth distinguishing the ticket owner from the process owner. The ticket owner is responsible for resolving this specific request. The process owner, in this example, the head of customer support, is responsible, among other things, for making sure that every ticket has an owner and that ownership is transferred when the current owner is unavailable. The process owner can also define a workflow that lets everyone involved see the big picture without going into individual details. To start with, a few simple statuses are enough. Here's an example that worked well for one of my clients. To do for new untouched requests. In progress for ones where someone is already working on a solution. Client info required for complete requests where missing information from the client is blocking a response. Boss info required for requests that need internal escalation, exceptions, complex cases, or anything requiring additional cost approval. Blocked for cases where neither support nor the client can currently do anything, for example, because they're waiting for a scheduled maintenance window. Done for requests that are resolved but not yet confirmed as effective. And closed For requests where the client has confirmed it's okay or didn't respond within, for example, 5 days of receiving the resolution. This is just an example, of course. You can structure it differently. What matters is to start with something simple enough not to lock people in, but sufficient to see the broader picture without having to dive into individual cases. Importantly, these statuses apply to the customer's request, not to the bug in the software that caused it. Bug handling is a separate process, usually owned by tech, not support. Now, the output. At the output, what matters is what customer support delivers to clients and what it doesn't. A common example, especially in B2B services, is client requests for additional features. Because here you have this fluid boundary between what you still fix at your own cost and what you'll do only if the client pays for it. In practice, if a company isn't a large corporation, the so-called minor development often still happens within the customer support process. But it's important to agree clearly where the line is. For example, anything requiring more than 2 hours work require a formal feature request and a separate quote. Otherwise, your support team will be permanently buried in free work that your company could perfectly well be invoicing for. Wherever you draw that line, your team needs to know where it is. Otherwise, you'll never stop answering the question, are we handling this in support or should we send it to tech for a quote? Pillar 5, single source of truth. Not 10 different Slack threads, not an email chain with 5 people in CC, not team memory, because none of these scale. There must be one place where both the process owner and all other interested parties can see how many requests there are, what their status is, who's handling what is the communication history, and so on and so on. Then, when a client calls the founder asking about a ticket, the founder no longer has to hunt for who knows what or read through a long email chain. Now there's a process, so the founder has the answers available whenever they're needed. And finally, pillar 6, the feedback loop. In our example, this could mean defining a few high-level categories for the cause of each request, which support agents could tag before closing the ticket. You could start with just 4. Users not knowing how to use the product, software bugs, missing features, and others. And then expand as needed. With that data, you can quickly identify where the biggest improvement potential lies without having to analyze individual cases. Because if most requests are about users not knowing how to use the product, then maybe the right solution would be additional training sessions, video walkthroughs during onboarding, or a simpler interface. And if most come from software bugs, maybe it's worth looking more closely at quality in tech. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your team isn't good enough. Maybe something in the project triangle, budget, scope, and time, was defined too ambitiously for them to be able to deliver the right quality. Or maybe most requests are actually feature requests in disguise. It might be worth checking if sales isn't overpromising. Or you may prioritize the roadmap to ship those features first, which show the strongest demand in the ticket data. With data like that, available in a large sample and immediately, you save enormous amounts of time because strategic decisions finally stop requiring hours of analysis. You just look in one place and you already know. And that's the entire MVP process. Simple, light, useful. Not built to control people, but built so that the company can run without the same questions being asked over and over again. I've used the ticketing system as the example because several well-known providers offer simple cloud-based versions for small teams completely free of charge. But if your current scale doesn't require that yet, You can absolutely start with a shared inbox and a shared Google Sheet where your team logs cases and their statuses. The only important thing is that your processes have the 6 pillars that I have described. Because a process is not the tool you're using. A process is a way of thinking about how to operate more effectively when questions and decisions start to be repeatable. Before we close, I have a short challenge for you. Nothing big, something you can easily do even this week. Think of one area in your company where operational day-to-day issues land on your desk most often. Not strategic questions, purely operational ones, such as how do we approach this? Where do we start? Who should handle this? If we do it like this, will it be okay? Is this still within our scope? Or an area where you are the one always looking for answers, and every time you need them, you have to wade through emails or talk to several people before you know enough to make a conscious decision. Got it? Okay, now go through the 6 pillars of the MVP process, one by one. Pillar 1, scope definition. Do people know clearly what falls into this area and what doesn't? If at least some of the boomerang questions are about the scope, you know that this is the pillar to sharpen. Pillar 2, the process owner. Do people have clarity about who is accountable for the end-to-end result and who makes the decisions? If you see that several areas overlap or multiple people are responsible, or you as founder are the only person who really ties everything together, you know what to change. Appoint one owner and make sure that they have what they need to operate independently. More on this in episodes 3 and 4. Pillar 3, single point of contact. Do people know where they can get support instead of coming forward to you? If not, or if in practice they go to different places or always end up asking you, that may be a sign that a single point of contact is either missing or it hasn't been effectively communicated. Pillar 4, how it works, but only for the 20% of cases that generate 80% of repeatable questions. At the input, in the process, and at the output. If the same questions keep coming back, write down the most common ones and answer them once. Pillar 5, the source of truth. Do you have one place where you can always check, without asking anyone, what's happening with a given topic? Who's handling it? What are the answers to the most common questions? What does the big picture look like? If the current version of truth is floating around, you have to ask someone to know the status. The responsible person keeps changing and it's really hard to keep track. You know what to sort out. And the last pillar, the feedback loop. In the area you've chosen, is aggregate information available that you can make decisions from? If getting that information requires asking people or analyzing case by case, message by message, you know what to improve. You can start by writing down 3 to 6 questions from this area that you need answers to most often. For each, you can define 3 to 6 standard answer options and add the catch-all other bucket. You can expand it later. For now, having something beats having nothing. One very important thing, you don't have to do this alone. In fact, you shouldn't. Do it together with the process owner you identified in Pillar 2, because they're the one who will be running this process. Just remember, don't try to make it perfect. Don't fix everything. Don't go deep into individual issues or infrequent edge cases. Only the questions that keep coming back. And this time, just this one process. For starters, it's enough that this one area stops constantly bouncing back to you and starts working in a slightly more systemic way. not in a rigid way, in MVP form. And this is not a step towards corporate rigidity. This is a step towards a company that can keep growing without you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Good luck. Let me know in the comments how it went. In the next episode of Founder to Zero, we'll tackle finance, but not the spreadsheets, invoices, and bookkeeping version of finance. We'll look at finance from altitude, from a founder's perspective. We'll talk about why finance and accounting are not the same thing, why at a certain point accounting data alone stops being enough, and what to put in order and in what sequence so that you can have meaningful conversations with investors, make strategic decisions, and prepare the company for the next stage of growth. And if after today's episode you feel that the operational chaos in your company is still eating more of your time than it should, and you'd like to talk confidentially, one-on-one, about how to sort out your processes so that they actually work without turning your company into a rigid corporation, you'll find the contact link below this video. And if this episode was useful, leave a comment, like, share, subscribe. It genuinely helps me make more content like this. That's it for today. Take care, and see you in the next episode.